I want to welcome everybody. As you guys can see, this is a much larger group than we typically get. And it's a combination, I think, of New Year's, everybody wanting to what can I do that's fun and exciting in the New Year's? That always leads to good meetup numbers. And then Penny was like, you know what? Alchemy is just cool. Everybody wants to do it. And I'm like, okay. So I think it's kind of a combination of that. We've been through, this is a combined meetup for the Denver Tarot Geeks, which John and Penny are representatives of that, and of the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup, which I am the organizer of. And so as we have worked together already to bring you 2 years working through the cube of space, one from the perspective of Hulse and one from the perspective of Townley. And so now we're going to begin this 10-month process of exploring alchemy in context of the BOTA Tableau, which will bring the Tarot's Major Arcana into it. This is basically a directed study. And so John and Penny and I are trying to learn it. You know, basically what our job as moderators is to promise to study ahead of time so that we can help you guys on your own journey of learning. None of us are experts. And so we're just trying to read the book like a chapter ahead of you, basically. The main text is The Sorcerer's Stone by Dennis William Houck. And for the levels of unfoldment, that's in Paul Foster Case's book, Occult Fundamentals and the Levels of Unfoldment. I'm going to offer it up to Penny, who's going to lead off the group by introducing us to the Emerald Tablet.
Hey, everyone, I'm Penny, and it is so cool to see like this many faces here. I love that. It's exciting that you all are interested in this. As Joy said, definitely none of us are experts, and we're here to learn from you as much as we can too. So this is super exciting. So as Joy mentioned, the first part of the presentation today is on the Emerald Tablet itself. So we're going to take a very, very abbreviated look at its history, just given the time that we have. That could be a class in itself for sure. So that abbreviated history we'll go over, and then we'll do a full reading of the text with a short breakdown of the concepts in that text. And then I think we should have time to look at a couple works of art that really serve to bring to life the Emerald Tablet text, as well as just general alchemical principles and processes. So let me go ahead and, so the Emerald Tablet is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and sometimes referred to as the Emerald Tablet of Thoth. It's a highly regarded ancient artifact of emerald stone or colored glass. The tablet contains what some would say are the secrets of the universe, and describe a pattern of creation and a formula for protection. So whether that be the transformation of base metals into gold, or the transformation of the human personality and soul into its most fully integrated and highest expression. And the well-known axiom that I'm sure you've all heard, as above, so below, comes from this text. The tablet serves as an emblem of what philosopher Aldous Huxley calls the perennial philosophy, and what's also been termed the ageless wisdom, so called because the threads of this wisdom run throughout time and exist throughout many cultures. The exact history of the tablet is somewhat ambiguous, with several theories about its true origins. One accepted belief that we'll mainly work with today has the tablet originating in Egypt over 12,000 years ago, and after a period is said to have been sealed within what was later the Pillars of Hermes for protection during the Great Flood. And later that tablet would be removed from the pillar and moved to the Temple of Amen outside of Cairo. And when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, he took the tablet among other artifacts and supposedly built the Great Library at Alexander to initially house and translate and study the tablet. So the text, although not necessarily the tablet itself, made its way to the Arabic world, where scholars there compiled and transcribed it at some point between the 4th and 9th centuries. And then beginning in the 12th century, it was believed is when it began to be transcribed into Latin. So the text and its various translations served as a seminal piece of work during the medieval and Renaissance era, alchemy and philosophy, attracting the likes of the philosophers of the time, like Roger Bacon and Albertus Magnus. Isaac Newton was apparently fascinated by the text, spending some 20 years diving into its mysteries and publishing his own commentaries on it. It maintained prominence into the more modern era with Carl Jung and Aleister Crowley, as well as many other notables within the early occult, metaphysical, and theosophical movements. And while translations might differ in length or number of stanzas, they can differ in richness of detail and tone, the significance of the tablet and the wisdom it offers does continue to serve as a wellspring of wisdom and inspiration today, for sure. So to quote Dennis Hawk, who's the author of some of the materials we have on our reading list, the Emerald Tablet implies that if we connect with this higher reality through the purification of consciousness, we can alter physical reality by changing the spiritual archetype on which it is based. And perhaps maybe put another way, and to quote the Matrix, you'll see that it is not the spoon that bends, it is yourself. So who is Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the Thrice Great, as he is called? So while there's many intriguing stories of origin about the lineage and true identity of Hermes Trismegistus, the common theory associates him with the Greek god Hermes, the Roman Mercury, and the Egyptian god Thoth. And as we know, Thoth is viewed as being the first alchemist and had served as like an intermediary between the godlike beings that were said to roam the earth at the time and humans. As the years went on, other gods and luminaries from Egyptian, Greek, Islamic, and other faiths were assimilated into the being that we know as Hermes Trismegistus. So Hermes, or Thoth, is deemed as the father of Hermeticism, hence the name Hermeticism, and is attributed with founding more progressive approaches and systems in writing, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, and magic. So besides giving us the Emerald Tablet, Hermes gave us the 17 treatises of the Corpus Hermeticum and the Divine Pymander, or Mind. There's also said to be a more arcane body of work comprised of 42 volumes out there somewhere. And perhaps the best known work besides the Emerald Tablet is the Kybalion. This volume, formally published in 1908 under the authorship title of the Three Initiates, is directly attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and often seen as a companion piece in understanding and working with the Emerald Tablet. And quickly, in the Kybalion, there are 7 principles outlined that correlate to the concepts in the tablet, and those would be the principle of mentalism, of correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and the principle of gender, or regeneration and function. And as we make our way through the tablet today, we'll definitely see some of those principles at work. And there will be a PDF handout. I realized we're moving very quickly here with a lot of information. So that will be uploaded to the chat at some point that lists those things in more detail. All right, so the version of the tablet we're going to look at today is a shorter translation than some. It does come from that Dennis Hawk book, The Sorcerer's Stone, that's again on our reading list. And this version is comprised of 7 stanzas, which fits neatly into the studies we'll be doing throughout the next few months relating to 7. The stanzas are also called rubrics, and the word rubric is a word or a section of text that was often printed in red ink, or where the first letter would be printed in red ink for emphasis. So we'll go ahead and I'll read the tablet, and then we'll have a short breakdown of some of its concepts. And you can all see this page okay? We're still on track. All right. In truth, without deceit, certain and most veritable, that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. And just as all things have come from this one thing through the meditation of one mind, so do all created things originate from this one thing through transformation. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind carries it in its belly. Its nurse is the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. Thus you will obtain the glory of the whole universe. All obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all powers, because it overcomes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. In this way was the universe created. From this comes many wondrous applications, because this is the pattern. Therefore am I called thrice greatest Hermes, having all three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Herein have I completely explained the operation of the sun. So contemplation of these concepts within the tablet could be, a class or even a lifelong exercise of its own. But for now, we're going to just kind of skim the surface and look at some general interpretations compiled from different sources, as well as just from my own experience in working with the text over the years. And I'll definitely look forward to diving deeper later on with the rest of you as we get further into this series. So looking at the first stanza or rubric, it basically sets a dedicational and consecrating tone by declaring that the text is indeed true and certain. The second rubric, and definitely one of the more substantial, introduces the concept of correspondence and initiates that vertical relationship between the above and the below, or heaven and earth, spirit and matter, higher vibrations with slower ones, etc. And as it is stated here that there are corresponding planes in various levels of creation, I think it would be prudent to draw analogies between macrocosm and microcosm. An example of this could be the way some people think a nebula is thought to resemble the human iris in the eye with its swirled pattern and dark center. This phrase also speaks to the idea of one mind, and that the universe or all things come from the one mind. Therefore, the concept of mentalism, as described in the Kybalion, is alluded to here. Since that which created the universe was one, it's assumed that all objects originated from the one or from an undifferentiated and primal matter. Still looking at that second stanza here, we're also seeing the principle of vibration as discussed in the Kybalion. Can be seen, so do all created things originate from this one thing through transformation. So transformation often associated with vibration, as vibration is a means to bring about transformation by raising one's vibratory rate, say. And then conversely, as one transforms, your vibratory rate changes. A quick example to link this to the tarot would be key 14, temperance, where we see the concepts of vibration and transformation there. So moving to the third rubric or stanza, we have introduced the four elements with the sun as fire, the moon as water, wind as air, and the earth as, of course, earth. And it speaks to the differentiation in the workings of the one thing. These elements also do relate to the first four alchemical operations, which we'll be exploring later. Some philosophies see the naming of the elements here as a short story of creation, that the prima materia is generated with fire and then developed and birthed by water, brought down and disseminated from the heavens within the air, and then nourished and solidified into its fulfillment within the earth. The statement, its strength is perfected if it is changed into earth, can speak to the development and nourishment of the prime matter by the earth, that then leaves it something different than earth, the way mother's milk would be different than the actual child it's feeding. So in an esoteric sense, prime matter, when used for human purposes in transformation, must be fixed or established into a stable substance like earth and then perfected. Otherwise, the human personality can't actually engage with it on the material realm, is the thinking there. All right. So looking at the fourth verse, presents kind of an enigmatic formula for entering the spiritual realm of above by separating the earth from the fire and the subtle from the gross. It also describes the fifth and sixth alchemical processes, and the final process of coagulation is particularly alluded to here as the powers of the above and below combine themselves and or seen as the conscious and subconscious or spirit and matter are united. The principle of polarity, again listed in the Kybalion, is alluded to here with the lines, the earth from the fire and the subtle from the gross. For this, the principle of polarity does state that supposed opposites are similar in nature, but different in degree. And then reference to the principle of rhythm, which states that all things rise and fall, can also be seen in this fourth verse, with the earth, or the essence, rising to earth, from earth to heaven, and then back down again. The fifth stanza reveals the developments of the previously stated operations and conditions, and so the result is seen as the glory of the universe, or that which is obtained, that which is the purified or perfected quintessence, as well as the purified or perfected human personality or ego. And then we see the principle of cause and effect referenced here as, you know, the consequence or outcome from working with these operations, or that which has been obtained. And then the sixth section, kind of just, I think most seem to feel it just kind of concretizes everything that has come before, and basically explains that all the previous text has definitely outlined a particular universal pattern that does bring about transformation on multiple levels of reality. And the wondrous application spoken of, you know, implies that not only purification and transformation, but also transmutation surely will follow. The seventh and final stanza states the author as the thrice greatest Hermes, perhaps thrice for having attained the wisdom on all three levels of reality: physical, mental, spiritual, and in the three modes of consciousness: self-consciousness, subconsciousness, and super or unified consciousness. The operation of the sun, as our last line, can speak to several things, as the sun can symbolize God, gold, or the initiating and inspiring power of fire. And as our famous esoteric mentor, who we all love, Paul Foster Case, says in his volume Hermetic Alchemy, the fire of the alchemists is closely related to the first matter, for it is, as Paracelsus tells us, the principal subject of this art. So that thought that this whole tablet and its meaning is about this operation of the sun, or of that initial fire. Oh, sorry. All right, so I'm going to look at a few images here and some of their symbolism before we move on. So this Tabula Smaragdina, which is literally Latin for emerald tablet, created in 1618 by an artist and publisher named Mathieu Marian. It's a pretty complex piece of work that was born out of the endeavor to combine and contain all the symbols in alchemy and within the Emerald Tablet into one, kind of dynamic vision. This engraving ultimately shows the Philosopher's Stone as it descends from heaven and enters the material realm. And in essence, the tabula is a summation of the process to achieve the stone or achieve purified integration that the alchemist seeks. So in the above, we can see the main larger sun as the one, or the one mind, whose rays encompass the entire universe, and that rises behind an intermediate sun that Hermes called the mind as maker. This second sun, kind of with the white rays there, is ruled by 29 cherubs or angels, and they're conceptualized as archetypal forces that carry out creation through what's called the crystallized thoughts of God. The three smaller circles or solar presences amongst those angels are the three heavenly or prime elements in the Trinity, with sulfur in the center there, standing as for tetragrammaton or God unity, and Mercury as the sun or reconciler on the left, and salt as the Holy Spirit or dove of peace within matter on the right. Within the below, we see the contrast between solar forces as daytime on the left and the lunar as nighttime on the right. At the bottom of the below, we see our four elements purified and sealed within little orbs, being carried by the phoenix and the eagle. The upright lion that you see on the left is said to represent the active fiery energy, while on the right, the upright stag is known as the fugitive stag, a symbol of watery energy. The naked man is soul, and notice at his breast, the crescent moon there at his left breast represents the seed of the feminine principle within him. On the right, we see Luna with a sun at her breast to indicate her intuitive powers actually in action, from which the stream of stars or the Milky Way pour forth and then ground into the earth. Looking above Sol and Luna, we see what's termed the clouds of unknowing. In the center of the below, we see our hermaphroditic alchemist holding up his starry hatchets, and he's cut the chains of the clouds of unknowing, the chains that keep Sol and Luna in their dualistic states. And so he can now peer beyond those clouds of unknowing and is no longer ruled by instinct or polarity alone. So he's become the symbol of the integration of opposing forces, having neither destroyed or denied his two halves, and stands as the perfect unification of fire and water. The lions he stands on represent sulfur and Mercury, or soul and spirit, and they unite to produce what's called the ferment, which is a herald of the stone, appearing as that thick substance flowing from their mouths. Looking above the alchemist in the center, past those rings of stars and planets, we see that central sphere made up of 7 layers, each symbolizing the 7 steps of transformation that are to be peeled away to reach the stone, which is that innermost sphere where you see the white triangle. And again, this is a super skimming over of the symbolism here for time's sake. And the handout will have a little bit more detail on that. And so our final image that we'll look at, the Azoth of the Philosophers, refers to the first matter, not only at its beginning point, but also as the perfected work to be achieved. As the A and the Z refer to Alpha and Omega, and the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. So what I think is one of the most inspiring and striking concepts here is it's said that the depiction of the alchemist, or that the triangle in the center about the alchemist, is a mirror that reflects to the alchemist the face of God as his own face, or the face of man, and therefore corresponds the first with the last. with his position in the center of these stages, you know, he is kind of that first and last. And so I like that idea of that triangle being that mirror. The masculine and feminine powers are seen in the Sun King and the Moon King. The Sun King with authority and strength over the rational or visible world, the Moon Queen ruling the forces of the subconscious and hidden. The dragon beneath the king represents rejected portions of the unconscious, and the bow and arrow the queen holds are said to symbolize the wounds of the heart and body that she has integrated as part of her being, and as part of material reality. The king and queen together represent the two modes which we typically engage with our existence via thoughts and feelings, or waking consciousness and ego with the subconscious. The wings at the top represent ascended essence, or the soul raised to the highest level it can go within the body. And the salamander and bird are soul and spirit, as well as the polarized energies that spark the impetus of transformation. Within the transformation, one thing can often take on characteristics of the other as it moves along its spectrum of polarity. And as we get further into our studies this year, we'll see that things kind of becoming one thing or another can help us explain, you know, often sulfur and Mercury are kind of interchangeable in what they represent. And one of the explanations for this is that it's that movement between the spectrum of polarity. And so it can explain why Mercury can be associated with both, or the same for sulfur. Finally, we see our three prime essences of sulfur, Mercury, and salt in those triangles of anima, spiritus, and corpus. So in closing, this picture, the Emerald Tablet, the Kybalion, you know, all these alchemical operations that are alluded to and described within these tools and pieces of work we have are really seen as a paradigm of like the creative process and the union of seemingly differentiated aspects of the one thing, or of unity. And I really think that meditation upon the tablet, whatever translation speaks to you, or even you know, rewriting the lines in relevant ways to you, can be a pretty illuminating exercise to really understand the purification and transmutation of consciousness. All right, well, that is it for the portion on the Emerald Tablet. So I will upload the images and the handouts in the chat at some point before this is over, but thank you so much.
What we're going to move on to now is we're going to talk a little bit about the other basic components of alchemy. Some might call them principles of sorts, but these are basically the ingredients of the alchemical laboratory and the work that the alchemist does, and very, very basic principles. Some of you might probably have come across this before, even if you haven't studied alchemy directly, because some of these terms do come up in some other studies. But we'll go ahead and start off with some more visual aid. So you should be seeing a big triangle. So I'm going to start off with this idea of the Tetractys, which is not necessarily particularly alchemical idea, but it is a concept that does describe the process of evolution and creation in a rather succinct and very unique way, I would say. Something that appeals to both logic and in a spiritual sense. Essentially, the Tetractys is this. It is a large equilateral triangle made up of several equilateral triangles stacked up Tetris style, and which form a group of 10 distinct points at the intersections at 4 distinct levels. Now, these numbers were important not just to the alchemists, but a lot of esoteric thinkers at the time, as numbers of meaning completeness and wholeness. And a lot of one of the main gists of this particular glyph here was, as also the numerology was very important because it was developed by a guy who was all about numbers, a guy named Pythagoras, which I'm sure everyone's heard about. And in particular, this idea really was able to translate itself very succinctly in areas of physics, and particularly in the physics of music, where we have here a series of ratios. We have a ratio of 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4. All of these are describing the most basic and fundamental harmonies in music. The 1 to 2 is basically the octave, is the same note at a higher register. And your perfect fifth and your perfect fourth are your basic garden variety power chords that metal guitarists like to use so much. Very, very fundamental, very basic, and very much, a succinct kind of recognition of a geometrical progression and geometrical harmony, both in nature and in the human mind. Plato was another person who used this particular system as his advantage when he was applying the same ideas to society. And he described the perfect society in his work, The Republic, in which we have a king or queen at the apex of the pyramid. We have a set of administrators proportionally set below them, a proportion of soldiers below them, and at the base of the pyramid are the workers. Now, I agree, it's probably not the most ideal society for everyone, but for Plato, it was considered top-notch. The Neoplatonists took that same idea of this emanations and harmonizing from the top down in their description of the cosmos, where they had the idea of oneness at the top of the pyramid. Out of this oneness is derived the nous, or the divine mind, the first intelligence emerging from that one. From out of that divine mind comes psyche, or the world's soul, the first emergence of individual character. And it's something distinct as an individual substance, until finally we get to matter at the very bottom. And you don't worry about if taking down all of this. This is just, you don't really need to take this down as notes. This is just a demonstration of just how the Tetractys is used in a descriptive manner. There will be a handout for this at the end, and it will contain some of the information we're going to explore next. But for those of you who might recognize this Neoplatonism idea, is probably for those of you who have studied the Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah describes a very similar process of emanation. I'm sure we have some of you who have studied Kabbalah might have seen this particular arrangement here of Hebrew letters. This is an arrangement of the Tetragrammaton, which is the 4-letter name of God, starting with Yod at the top, He, Vav, and He final. Now, among other things, these are describing discrete levels of emergence and creation, with absolute at the top, the world of archetypes. These are the ideal forms. Again, this is a very Platonic idea. When next below that, we have the creative world in Bria, where those ideals proliferate and possibilities begin to arise. Yetzirah is the next world down, where those resilient ideas start to take shape. And blueprints are formed for the most basic level, which is the material world, which is where we are at our own level of ordinary perception. So, again, you might be thinking, where does all this have to do with alchemy? Well, alchemy has very similar ideas, not just regarding the cosmos, but about the ideas of substance and being. So let's go ahead and plug our alchemical values into this framework. Now, just reminding ourselves, this is a top-down structure. This is a structure which starts at the apex and works its way down. And you will see at various intersections, things will split apart, and things will recombine and split apart again. We begin at the top with the concept of unity, represented by what a lot of philosophers refer to as the monad. This is a state of oneness, of a principle of absolute unification where nothing is distinguished from each other. It is the primordial mass in which all things manifested from. The alchemists had their own terminology for it, which they called prima materia. There's that same state of absolute unification of all things, where nothing is distinct from one another. At the next level down, you have out of prima materia comes the idea of polarity. And this was described as what the alchemists called the contraries. The contraries describe your very basic pair of opposite qualities, most commonly being referred to as lunar and solar, as we did see some of that symbology coming up in the images we were looking at previously. Now, this particular symbology is also carried over in the symbols of feminine and masculine in a lot of alchemical work. And we'll see as we descend through this Tetractys that these particular poles do maintain their same paths along their respective sides of the Tetractys. And you might see them continue in their more pure form and recombine to form other things. Case in point, we have our next level, our threefold level, which is the concept of interaction. With the polarities, we have two distinct opposite qualities that are inherent in prima materia. And now we see those contraries interacting with one another, perhaps in an attempt to reunify, but often resulting in something new. These were symbolized by the alchemists as the essences or the essentials. These were principles that were found on all levels of reality, and that every substance has these qualities and these essences buried deep within them in varying properties. And they're known as salt, mercury, and sulfur. Salt is a formative principle. It represents the tangible effects of the prima materia in its way towards manifestation, the form that the substance takes. It was therefore known as, thought to be the body of the substance. Mercury, while not necessarily being a product of the masculine and feminine polarities, or with the solar and lunar interacting, does contain aspects of both. It is often in a lot of symbology thought to be ambiguous in terms of gender. So Mercury is the principle of fluidity. It represents the agencies or the laws by which the prima materia manifests, or in some ways, the spirit of the substance, carrying with it a little spark of that prima materia, something common to both solar and lunar, but yet existing as its own third entity. And finally, we have the sulfur. We have that the activating principle. This is the will, prima materia, to express and progress itself. The more aggressive tendencies of a substance, again, carrying on that masculine quality. And this is what's thought to be the soul of a substance, something that represented a specific identity in the substance's qualities and characteristics. So we have body, spirit, and soul of a substance represented in these three essences. At the base of the pyramid here, we have the concept of structure. And this is be represented by the elements. And I'm sure many of you have probably seen the symbols for these elements. Even if you have not studied alchemy, they probably have shown up in several tarot decks in representation of the suits. We have the element of water, of earth, air, and fire. These were the four big elements that a lot of the people like Pythagoras and Plato and Aristotle in particular had proposed that all substances were made of these four qualities in various proportions. And water, to start with, has the qualities of being wet and cold, and is known to the alchemists as being phlegmatic, or having a flowing and flexible quality about them. The things with more earth characteristics share the quality of coldness with water, but instead of being wet, this is cold and dry. The alchemists refer to this as being melancholic, or being stable and static in nature. Air, on the other hand, is a complete opposite of earth, in that it is hot and wet in nature. The alchemists call this property sanguine, or being changeable and unpredictable. And lastly, we have fire, being hot and dry. The alchemists call this choleric, being radiant and kinetic in nature. And even if you look at all of these four elements and just, you could easily draw parallels between these concepts and the states of matter, whereas water could be seen as a liquid state. Earth can be the state of solid state. Air is a gaseous state, and fire a plasma state. And again, this information will be on the handout, so don't worry if you didn't get all of that. But I wanted to just cap this off with kind of bringing this back to tarot and seeing how we can use a bit of tarot to help us illustrate these concepts. And this is not going to be the arrangement of, not the tableau that was referred to previously. This is just an arrangement of the cards on the Tetractys itself in place of these particular concepts that we've just outlined. So let's get rid of all of that and start flipping these around. It all begins with the first 10 cards of the Major Arcana. And I can't think of any better place to start with than the Fool, representing the monad, having all potential but yet no substance. The Fool is generally thought of as being androgynous and just very ambiguous in terms of gender. Until we get to the next cards, we have the Magician and the High Priestess. The Magician, these are the first differentiation of gender we have in the deck. So we have a representative of the male the masculine qualities in the magician and the feminine qualities in the high priestess. You know, this is a very different arrangement than what you might be used to if you've studied Kabbalistic correspondences. But we're entering a completely different system here. So be prepared to look through some changes. Now for the next set of cards on the next level, I do rely on the writings of Aleister Crowley and a few others in assigning the value of the Empress card to Salt. She is the embodiment of the formative soul, the formative quality. And a lot of writings, Salt is represented here in the case of the Empress. And in some cases, she is almost mimicking the symbol of Salt. This is a little more obvious when we plug in the sign of the card Emperor with sulfur. If you even look at his pose, you know, his legs are crossed and his arms are held out in a triangular shape. He is mimicking the sign of sulfur there. So we have our essential masculine and feminine duality here, plus our third entity, the Hierophant, taking the place of Mercury. Mercury being that fluid principle and the ways of which the above translates into the below. And here we have as its representative, the Hierophant, the bridge maker. He is the key, the holder of the keys between these two worlds. Lastly, we have at the base of the pyramid, we have our elements, and the remaining cards just happen to correspond to astrological signs that correspond to these particular elements. So the assignment becomes an easy one. Our next card, the Lovers, is associated with the sign Gemini. So it covers the air quality, the air element. Our next card, the Chariot, is associated with Cancer. That's a water sign. Strength is associated with Leo. It's a fire sign. And lastly, neatly, we have the Hermit, which is Virgo, and that is an earth sign. I'll leave that up for just a little bit if you wanted to jot down that arrangement. I do not have that on the handout, but you can always just fill in those particular values on your own. And there we have it. And I'll post that handout in the chat room.
That was great, John. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I like seeing those first set of Major Arcana cards laid out that way.
So our next particular segment, where we will be passing the torch over to Joy. And Joy will be going through the ladder of the planets, I believe. And we'll also be taking, I think, a sneak peek at the tableau.
Yep, that is right. Okay, so I did not do a slideshow, only through my own inability to keep on track with all the assignments I had for various things. However, I do have a handout, so I'm going to upload that right now into the chat here. So my job was to talk about the 7 stages of alchemy. And so I prepared this handout. Like I said, I didn't have time to convert it into a slideshow, so I'm just going to talk. And I wanted I'm trying to watch the time and cover everything, and I know I'm not going to get to everything in my handout, but I do want to introduce the topic though, because the 7 stages, those of you that know me know I have Mercury in Pisces, so being able to say like a complete sentence from beginning to ending, like with a capital letter and a period, is almost impossible for me. I constantly interrupt myself and go down various paths, but they all wind together and braid together into a solid thought at the end. So please be patient with me if you're new to me and my talking style. One of the things, and somebody had mentioned early on about the stages of the soul and in terms of the levels of spiritual unfoldment that Paul Foster Case talks about. And so the stages definitely relate to that. And that is actually the essence of my topic right now, is to explore that with you. But before we even go there, I wanted to ask, why alchemy? And, alchemy is something that I've wanted to study for years and years and years. I read a book 25 years ago, which I had some interesting experiences. You wouldn't think you'd remember something you read 25 years ago, and it worked on me in a really deep manner. And I won't go into that story, although it's an interesting one, but you remember things. And one of the insights, I tried to do a lot of meditation on this, on the content of our study. And one of the things that happened for me is I had this odd insight that was suddenly like, alchemy is everything. Everything is alchemy. I was like, boring. And I was like, well, but I mean, it's true. And then I thought, what's really kind of interesting about that is that we all experience alchemy long before we ever would experience something like tarot, even before we experience something like astrology, because alchemy is figuring out what's wrong and fixing it. And we all do that all the time. And you don't have to be an esotericist or hermeticist or anything to do that. And so that's why alchemy is so essential to our lives. And it's of the Hermetic arts, it's the most complicated, it's the most difficult, it's the most abstract. And so that all seems like a whole bunch of gatekeeping around keeping it away from everybody. And the truth is, every time you're like, ugh, I want to change this about myself. Every time you're like, why doesn't this ever work when I do this? Every time you ask those questions, every time you try to fix it, you are literally doing alchemy as you try to improve the yourself and the things in your life. One of the main principles that I do want to touch on just slightly here, but I'm sure we'll come back to it later on, is the idea of ora et labora. And that is a Latin phrase that translates as pray and work, ora et labora. And one of the main properties or principles of the alchemical philosophy is that it is not just about the work. It is also about the spiritual component, the prayer. So ora is prayer, labora is work. And so the idea is to connect the above and below. And the above is spirit, the below is our life that we live every day. And so all of alchemy must, by necessity, according to the Emerald Tablet, include both aspects. And you'll come across alchemy texts that only talk about all the spiritual stuff, or worse yet, better yet, which is the exciting part, only give you crazy pictures that are totally impossible to understand. And then you'll find other alchemy texts that are just like, bring this to a boil, you know, attach the something something and then do the blah blah blah, and it's all just like very laboratory, and you're like, okay, well, I don't need a degree in chemistry, I'll just go ahead and go on to tarot or astrology or something that I can actually use right away. And so the key with alchemy is to work those two things in tandem. If you're doing any kind of practical thing, incorporate a spiritual dimension, incorporate meditation into it, incorporate prayer into it. And so one question that I have for you relating to that is how, and this is just something for you to think about, for you to meditate on, how can I connect my daily existence to the divine? How can I connect making this cup of tea and bring the divine into that? How can I connect my study of alchemy? How can I connect sitting down and reading this chapter when I'm really too tired to keep my eyes open? How can I connect that to the divine influence? Anything and everything that you do, brushing your teeth, eating food, preparing food, how can you connect it to the divine? And keep that idea flowing throughout your existence as you move into this study with us. So in order to understand the stages, these 7 stages of alchemy, and there are 3 stages, there's 4 stages, there's 5 stages, there's 7 stages, there's 12 stages. This is one assignment that whoever is teaching alchemy or facilitating a study has to choose. And so different authors will choose different maps to organize the information. And so so that's part of my job. We're working with Dennis William Houck, and he chooses a 7-fold format, but he also arranges those 7 stages in a particular order. That's not set in stone either. None of this stuff is set in stone. That's another reason alchemy is so difficult, is because no matter who you read, they're going to say something different than the other person. And so it's not like, you know, you think astrology has contentions about this, that, and the other thing. Like alchemy is way worse and just impossible as a layperson to come in and think that you found something and understand it and then immediately go to another author who explains it totally different. So one of the things that we needed to do is come up with this map that we're going to teach. And if you followed some of my recent presentations, I did one on magical images a couple months ago that is up on my YouTube. And we talked, it wasn't the main topic of it, but briefly tangentially in that discussion, we did address the idea that a map is a magical image. So when we choose the map that we're going to use to arrange our stages of development, we naturally create a magical image. And a magical image is, the magical part of it is that it is enlivened by spirit. So magical images like alchemy combine the representation, which is physical, with the enlivening spiritual component. And a lot of, as we were going through this, I had another, like I love my, I get these amazing downloads and these incredible insights. And then as soon as I realize them, I'm like, oh, well, that's obvious. So maybe that wasn't such a great download. But as I was going through, you should see my notes because I had triple exclamation points. I was working. We've been calling these 7 stages the ladder of the planets. I mean, the ladder of the planets, for those of you that don't know, it follows what we call the Chaldean order of the planets, which is from the slowest planet to the fastest. And when I say planets, I'm talking about the 7 traditional planets. And so it starts with Saturn as the slowest, and then Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, then Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. That's the ladder of the planets, and we use that in Kabbalah, and we used it in the cube of space. And so that is a traditional order for the planets, and the thing is, it doesn't fit with this because Hauck puts the sun at the end. And so I had been going through a lot. It's like, okay, well, you go down through the tree of life. Like, I'm a Kabbalist, so I have to put everything into Kabbalah in order to understand it. So I'm going down, you skip the sun, Tiferet, you go on to Netzach, Hod, and arrive at Yesod, the moon, and then instead of going down into Malkut, you would jump back up and conclude with Tiferet. And I was like, I can see that because there is an idea, there is a Kabbalistic idea of the Tiferet and Malkut actually marrying and producing offspring, and their union is usually placed at the level of Da'at on the tree. So I was like, okay, I can kind of make this work. There's some Kabbalistic stuff that I can use to make this work. And then all of a sudden, I just finally figured it out. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so insanely obvious. I can't believe I didn't realize it. This order is the order of the Thema Mundi. And if you are familiar, and I'm going to share, I opened a few images for you guys to look at. And so here is that order that Hauck uses. And this is, Hauck didn't design this. This is something old. Somebody else designed it sometime. Penny probably knows. I don't remember. And so it is Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. Oh, this one actually does have the sun here. Hauck puts Venus here. And then Mercury, let's see. Yes, Mercury here and the moon, and then concludes with the sun over here. And so this is something that, and this is in the ladder of the planets idea that that I was talking about before, the Chaldean order. This actual illustration goes Saturn, then Jupiter, Mars, and then the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, which is the traditional Chaldean order. So let me see if I can, one moment, please, as I figure out how to navigate between my images. So what we want to look at is this, and this is the Thema Mundi. And if you've studied with Chris at all, if you've studied a traditional astrology or Hellenistic astrology, you've come across this. And the idea is that this is the Thema Mundi is the chart of the world. And so that is considered to have 0 degrees Cancer rising. And so in the chart of the world, we put the moon, we start with Cancer rising, we put the moon there, then the sun shows up in Leo. And then from there, each planet in, again, following its Chaldean order, then goes in the next thing. So Mercury rules Virgo and Gemini, and then Venus rules Libra and Taurus, Mars, Scorpio and Aries, Jupiter, Sag and Pisces, and then Saturn gets both of these over here. And I think we can see that in this other one. That's where they're all laid out in that order. And so in the Thema Mundi, just the moon through Saturn on one side of the chart is what we call the chart of the world. It's considered the world chart that is like literally the natal chart of the creation of the world. And apparently Chris gives in his blog, he gives association of possible kind of a author of this in Berosus, whose mythology describes planets conjunct in Saturn. And if all the planets are conjunct in Saturn, the world would be destroyed by fire. It is interesting that we had 5 planets conjoined in Saturn, in Capricorn, in the beginning of 2020, and fever was one of the main symptoms of the resulting destruction that we went through. And then when all the planets conjoin in Cancer, the world is destroyed by flood. And so I'm sure most people have heard of that idea of the world will be destroyed by fire or flood, but this 3rd century BCE guy, Berosus, is the origin of that. And so there's kind of a beginning and ending idea, or a dual ending. But what happens is if we take that map and we go the other direction and we start with Saturn in Aquarius, and then we go to Jupiter in Pisces, we go to Mars in Aries. And so not going this direction, but starting here and going this way, we come around and we outline the exact order that Hauck is teaching this thing in, and really the order that it makes quite a lot of sense to end with the sun as I'm trying to avoid some of the obvious words, but just that final conjunction of all, or coagulation is the correct word, that final coagulation of all the elements, all the parts of the alchemical process. And so we go this direction. It's almost the opposite. The Thema Mundi starts here and goes through Capricorn, but now we're starting in Aquarius and going this way through the planets and arriving, starting with Saturn and arriving at the sun as the final ending point. Well, the other interesting thing, besides the fact that it fills in the gaps of the Thema Mundi, which is astrological in nature, and it kind of balances the astrological thing, it also highlights, instead of a Capricorn Cancer axis, it highlights a Leo Aquarius axis. And that brings to mind the age of Taurus, and the age of Taurus in which Aquarius was the sign that the sun was in at the winter solstice, and that Taurus was the sign the sun was in at the spring equinox, and that Leo was the sign the sun was in at the summer solstice. And so, and I can say the July solstice or June solstice or whatever, and however you even want to look at it, but this is a northern climes paradigm that originated, and so I think it really is more relevant to discuss the winter and the summer as the seasonal things, but that is the map that we are looking at. So we're looking at these 7 stages aligned with the 7 planets, aligned with the 7 minerals that they represent, and then mapped onto the Thema Mundi, and a progression from the winter solstice through the spring equinox, arising into a full, complete perfection at the summer solstice. So I'm going to stop sharing that and look at my notes here. So that brings me to the 7 stages, and I think my time is already up and I haven't even started. So how quickly can I go? I don't want to just read. I'll try to just do each one quickly. So the first stage is Saturn, and that is the lead, which is the unredeemed material. And it's association is calcination, which means to burn away the dross until you get just a fine white ash. Calcination comes from the root calx, C-A-L-X, which means bone. So the fact that it's Saturn ruling Capricorn actually works even a little bit better than Aquarius there, because Capricorn is associated with the skeleton. And so there's a lot there that works together. At the level of spiritual unfoldment, it's bondage. And so these are the things that we cling to. We're really trying, with this white ash, we're trying to find the essence that cannot be destroyed. And so the level of unfoldment is bondage, that we cling to these things that aren't truly us, that aren't truly our essence, but we cling to them. And then in the Thema Mundi, as Aquarius, this is the winter solstice in the age of Aquarius. And I always think of Aquarius as an ideal vision, but as ruled by Saturn, Aquarius first must destroy everything in order to build from a completely new foundation. And I've said this back when I was just teaching tarot, long before I started. Well, I had read that one book of Alchemy, which had affected me. But like raising a piece of land before new construction, Aquarius is associated. That was part of the previous sentence. So Aquarius needs to raise everything before it can build this new foundation. As Aquarius is associated with the public or general populace, in contrast to Leo, the king or the ruler. But on the shadow side, without a ruler, the people become lawless and destructive. And interestingly, Aquarius is associated mythologically with a flood, with the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha, whose name means fire, and they are a Greek myth, a flood myth that parallels the story of Noah's Ark. And so again, it was the people unconnected from God, lawless and without rule, and God decided to destroy them. And so that kind of works into our whole system here. So then Jupiter now is the spiritual level. It's the mineral tin. It's associated with Pisces. The spiritual unfoldment is awakening, and its alchemical process is dissolution. And so dissolution means to dissolve into liquid, or to dissolve through the agency of liquid, to just dissolve, or to dissolve into something. And then the ashes of calcination is what you will dissolve into a liquid or into a solvent. So the second step here is to take the remnants of the unredeemed matter and release. We got it down to just its essence, its bone, but now we want to release even the bone. We want that to dissolve as well. So in solution, two things become one. And so the unredeemed matter melts into this boundless sea. Feelings of loss, drowning, complete loss of identity, nowhere to get your footing, swept up in an undesired current, complete loss of control. Those are all feelings that you get when you go through the dissolution phase. At this level of spiritual unfoldment, this is the level of awakening. The cards are the High Priestess, the Hermit, and the Tower. This is Neo. I like Penny. I also wanted to have a matrix metaphor in mind. This is Neo awakening in the pod, in the real world. There's a complete loss of your sense of reality, and yet you are on your way to finding what is truly real. In the Thema Mundi, it's Pisces. This is the experience of gestation, the total dependence on another being with no awareness of self. So these are all at that dissolution level. We go from there into Mars, which is Aries. It's the metal iron. It's the idea of revelation and spiritual unfoldment. And in alchemy, it's separation. Separation is dividing something into its component parts. It's usually done via filtration or distillation. The third step in the process is to separate out the different parts: body, soul, and spirit, salt, sulfur, and mercury. Each part needs to be completely purified before being put back together again. The experiences can include having a more genuine, pure, authentic sense of self, and yet realizing that something is missing. At the spiritual unfoldment level, this is a level of revelation. The cards are the Empress, the Wheel, and the Star. Our eyes are opened when we realize that we're part of a larger cycle. We are starseed, and yet we have completely lost that connection. So the feeling is one of yearning. In Thema Mundi, it's Aries, being born into individuality, no longer dependent on or necessarily even supported by the other. Strong sense of independence, but lacking an awareness of community or a support system, feeling of extraordinary vulnerability when trying to be yourself. So then we go to Venus, which is Copper, the sign of Taurus. It's the spiritual unfoldment level of organization and the alchemical level of conjunction. Conjunction is the joining together of things. In this step, the purified components are now recombined. So the fourth step in the process is to bring the separated and purified parts back together. The experience, the way we experience this in life is finding a mate or a match. And so the symbolism is typically sexual, but any strong feeling of we go together is included here. Soul, sulfur, the flame of desire is added to the we previously had separated, and so now the materia has the soul added back into it. The idea of soulmates is common here. Spiritual unfoldment, this is the level of organization. The cards are the Emperor, Justice, and Moon. The sense of connecting with the other drives us to organize, which means to put like things together. And this is really interesting. In each stage, the planet, and of course, it's one of its signs that it rules has been identified. That's the Thema Mundi that we talked about. That's just the basis of what we're doing. But at this level, not only is Taurus being discussed here, but the three cards bring in Justice, which is Libra, and the Moon, which is Pisces. So Venus's second sign of rulership and her sign of exaltation are brought in at this level. And this is really, this to me is particularly fascinating. This clarifies that this level called organization is about presidency and governance. Individuality is no longer lawless when it recognizes the rulership of an organizing principle. And perhaps another way to say this is your freaky ways can be codified in a system of rules, which makes it okay because everyone agrees to certain qualifications and limitations. Revisiting the level of bondage, but now it is by choice. We agree to these rules, we agree to this organization. We say, okay, got it. I am ready to agree to this. In the Thema Mundi, this is Taurus, which is the spring equinox in the age of Taurus. Taurus is Gaia, the earth. At this level, we find our roots in a place, somewhere we feel like we belong. We feel it because the other people we match with are here, but there's, let's see. But more than that, we feel the throbbing lines of earth energy magnetizing us to this place. We claim it as our own. Going on to the next level, we have Mercury, which is Quicksilver. It is Gemini. The spiritual unfoldment is regeneration, and the alchemical process is fermentation. Fermentation is transforming juice or sugar and water into alcohol. This is a natural process that happens spontaneously when something rots, but it can also be engineered. Fermentation releases bubbles, which are symbolic of spirit, the breath of the divine. The fifth stage finds spirit in the solution. Fermentation is a more refined process of purification, a spiritization of the matter, sacrifice of the material for a new spiritual life, experience of divine inebriation, the energy and excitement of discovery, the ferment of pure focused and collegial minds coming together, the feeling of knowing your purpose. The spiritual unfoldment is regeneration. The cards are the Hierophant, Hanged Man, and Sun. Regeneration is a new lease on life, finding direction and intent, divine inspiration. Under the guidance of the Hierophant or teacher, you descend like the Hanged Man into the deep unconscious and there redeem the lost spark, returning like a diver with the pearl of great price. The exultant child of the Sun card leads with a pure heart. The resurrected Christ absolves all sin. In the Thema Mundi, Gemini is the twins, one mortal and one divine. We discover our immortal self. Gemini is a social sign connecting with others, inspired by ideas, reveling in communication, exalting in the human experience. Ourself and our match, having found our place in the world, now connect with neighbors and friends. These fratters and sorors in spirit confirm our own sense of self and our purpose, the thing that we already share with our mate, but now we expand on it. And through having others to work with, it magnifies the ideas exponentially. We revel in how aligned we are and explode in realizing how vast we are. Going from there to the next to the last stage, we get the moon, which is silver. It's Cancer, realization, and distillation. Distillation is the separation of a component by heat, its subsequent condensation in a cooler part of the apparatus where it is then funneled off into a separate container. The sixth stage is distillation. The heat of ferment during the day elevates moisture to heaven, and overnight that moisture purified appears as dew in the hours before dawn under the watchful care of the moon. The feeling of a spiritual rain, a blessing from heaven sprinkled with fairy dust. This is what it feels like. A gentle and loving feeling of little bursts of energy all over and through you, like a child taking your hand, or when somebody writes letters on your back, just that feeling. It's like, ooh, that's cool. And so on the spiritual unfoldment level, this is realization. The cards are the Lovers, Death, and Judgment. To realize is to make real. The joyous explosion of ideas from the previous level now unite with the person who can make them happen. What was impossible or only imagined becomes tangible and present in the world. We become present and tangible in the world. This is the achievement of the soul purpose, or at the very least, the discovery, the clear work towards the soul purpose. A quote that I searched on to see if I could verify it, and I only came up with my own blog, so I don't know where I originally got it, but it's a cool quote. Hopefully it's real. The Japanese term for birth is mu, and I did try to look it up, and it looked like umare was the actual term for birth. But I think this is like the source, radicals of it. It's consisting of the kodotama being, and mu, nothingness, being and nothingness. That is, life springs forth when form and emptiness are in perfect balance. And I thought that was really ideal, not just for this section, but even for those cards, Lovers, Death, and Judgment. The Thema Mundi is Cancer, which is, of course, the mother that gives birth. The sign of Cancer is the sign of home, of comfort, caring, and nurturing. The individual, having found a mate, a place, and a community, now builds a home, starts a family, whether it's, real or metaphorical, whether it's biological or not. The heart, the energy is what makes it a home. It's not the place, it's the energy. And that's what the moon is about, is the heart. The unseen emotion that vivifies anything and everything. And from there, we go into our final stage, the sun, the metal gold, the sign of Leo. Cosmic consciousness is the spiritual unfoldment, and coagulation is the operation in alchemy. So coagulation is the process of a liquid solidifying. Curdling milk is an example. That's kind of not it's kind of gross example, but that's an example. The seventh stage is coagulation. All three parts, body, soul, and spirit, or salt, sulfur, and mercury, are, after being recombined, solidify into a new and perfect body, the Philosopher's Stone. Union of spirit and matter above and below, the previously unredeemed matter is now resurrected in perfection. At the spiritual unfoldment level, this is cosmic consciousness. Its cards are the Chariot, Temperance, and the World. Complete awareness and use of the sub, self, and superconscious levels, the combination of which is a sum greater than its parts, its cosmic consciousness. Being joyfully aware of all that is, without restraint or judgment. This is being vaster than any sense of judgment, without confusion, without a sense of lack or separation. This is a fully integrated spirit and body, spirit, soul, and body, divine and human. In the Thema Mundi, it's Leo, so our summer solstice point at the age of Taurus. The sign of Leo is the sign of the king, fully realized leadership expressed first and foremost in the self. Only through self-perfection and complete self-direction in alignment with divine inspiration can leadership of others happen. Like the yin-yang symbol, perfection holds the seed of its opposite, which is why experience of cosmic consciousness is a prerequisite to leadership. Leadership can become tyranny, just as a complete autonomy of Aquarius in its shadow expression became lawlessness. When each individual wears his own crown of the rays of divine light, then the promised utopia of Aquarius can be realized. Achieving perfection of the self in Leo divinizes and perfects the entire cycle. So the divination that happens at the level of Leo by resonance and sympathy perfects everything that came before it and that will come after it in the next cycle. Hauck does mention the idea that the entire set of the 7 stages do need to be repeated 3 times. And I tried to pick examples that were things that I felt like I had experienced. And so I know I'm not enlightened. So I know that these are all kind of like baby steps of expression of this. And so the idea is that I tried to give those baby steps and things that we can all relate to, so that you can recognize that that's just one expression of it. And it goes through higher and higher ever expanding circles of this cycle as you continually refine your own being. We had a tarot exercise to do, and we did want to open to some questions. We've only got 10 minutes left. I think I'm going to give you guys the tarot spread, and then it's super easy, and then if people need to leave, they can, and then we can all open up to questions. So the tarot card exercise is just a 2-card thing, and this is the idea. We're embarking on a study. This is just the basic introduction to it, and so as we embark on this, we want to perform alchemy, and we're going to perform it on ourselves. And I'm going to talk at a later sense about spagyrics, maybe next month, and encourage people to do some very easy, totally home kitchen type of spagyrics work or making tinctures, but first and foremost, we want to look at ourselves and what we want to change in ourselves, because remember, it's all layers. The spagyrics is just another metaphor for the self, which is another metaphor for spiritual development. So the exercise is 2 questions. 1, what do you want to change? And 2, how do you want to be? What do you want to change? And how do you want to be? If you think you know those answers, feel free to look through your deck and choose the cards intentionally, like looking at the pictures and say, I know this is what I want to change. I know this is what I want to be. If you're like, I don't have a clue, I don't know where to start, shuffle up and draw randomly and let the tarot guide you in this process. This is, please do this. If you do it right now, that's ideal. If you do it sometime before next month, that's totally great. That works great. We're ultimately going to use this, what you want to change and how you want to be, and the cards that you pick for this, they're going to repeat and become part of future tarot work that we do during this. So please do this little tiny homework assignment. That is me. I apologize, and I apologize to my colleagues who kept within their time allotment, but let's go to questions. I know this was like an enormous info dump, which sucks in a lot of ways. Is anybody above and beyond the fact that info dumps always suck, was there enough stuff to get you, there's always glimmers in every info dump where you're like, oh wait, that helps me think about this differently. Oh, does everybody who feels like they got something new, something inspiring, something like that? Absolutely. Okay, cool. Excited. Yeah. Okay, cool. Lots to work with. That's inspiring. Okay, good. Lots of chewy material. I love chewy stuff. Yummy. Like really good sourdough bread, Somebody's thinking. I totally relate to that one. Lots to consider. Sparked a lot of inspiration and clarified a lot of concepts. A good start. That's good to hear. And Penny, do you have anything that you want to say in summary?
Well, I will say it sounds like we all might want to watch The Matrix at some point in the next few months.
That's an awesome idea. We can have a little watch party.
Yeah, that movie really hits the nail on a lot of these concepts and other things as well.
Yeah.
I think just the thing I would say in closing is really doing study for this over the last few months and everything today is seeing kind of what a movable goalpost a lot of this work is, right? Because once you reach a certain level of, transformation or that new stone, new ideas of what to transform will come upon you. And so, there is no such thing as I think that's why Hawk talks about doing it 3 times, is you're just never really finished.
And John, do you have anything you want to say to sum up or whatever?
That I'm looking forward to the rest of what we're going to explore here. And I think, one of my intentions for this was to explore alchemy through the medium of tarot. So the tarot is, I think, probably one of the most, my most used formats as far as, seeking esoteric knowledge. So I found it, it's a doorway for a lot of other things. So I like to look at everything through that lens.
Oh, and if I can, I'm going to share really quick again. This is the tableau, and this is the BOTA. This is a an arrangement of cards. A tableau is an arrangement of cards, and this is a BOTA tableau, and it starts with the Fool at the top, and it goes 7 cards in each of 3 layers. And so when I say that Saturn is the Magician, the Strength card, and the Devil, that's what I mean by that. And this is Paul Foster Case's level of spiritual unfoldment. It's the level of bondage. And so then when we overlay the alchemical stages onto that, we get the level of calcination. And then same thing, we go into the second one, which is dissolution, and well, so on and so forth. I won't go through all of them. That is the tarot part that we're going to be looking at, is just going through each stage like that, and examining and exploring the alchemical operation, as well as the level of spiritual development, as those 3 cards instruct us in that. Yeah, sorry for not, I should have said that way longer ago.
This was great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. This is very, very good.
Oh, awesome. Good. Glad I joined this. Thank you. See you next month. Yay!